it seems that CNNs and these guys, their journalistic philosophy is to, for the most part, just jump to the belief of whatever the CIA or whatever the United States says or the government says as being relatively true and just run from that standpoint, even though they know that the government has lied in the past. You don't take that philosophy. You take the philosophy of they're lying to me. Like starting off from jump, they're lying. Why do you take that philosophy? This is somewhat of a loaded question. Why do you take the philosophy that they're lying to me from jump? And why is that necessary for journalism? Explain to your journalistic peers. Give them a primer in journalism, a reprimer, let's say it that way, in journalism.
You know, honestly, really, my vision and my philosophy was really cemented over the last 2 years. So I didn't really, I didn't like some people at the corporate media, but I didn't have this visceral hatred that I do now. I mean, I don't wish death or anything. But the reason I know they're lying is because I've been out in the field. I've been to Flint, I've been to Standing Rock, I've been to Detroit, I've been to Alabama, I've been to St. Louis. I mean, I could go on. And I've seen the manifestations of government lies. I haven't been to Iraq, I haven't been to Syria, but I know my history. I've done my research. They lied. For example, perfect example now, literally, Flint is something I'm very passionate about. To me, it's not just about the water poisoning. It's about the corruption and the controlled demolition of the middle class. Flint used to be like Car USA with Detroit. Flint used to be a suburban utopia. It was basically what the United States was built on in the 1950s and 60s. And for a lot of reasons, it ended up being what it is now. And you look at now, the governor of Michigan just shut down those water pods, citing that the water is restored. I've been there 9 times. I know that the water is not safe because I've investigated it. I've been trying to get a piece out on that. The corporate media won't touch it because they just believe what the EPA tells them. They just believe what state agencies tell them. So my vision is informed from being on the ground. You get more of the truth, not from pundits, not from government officials, but from people, residents, people, activists. That's a very counterintuitive way of thinking, because when I worked at MSNBC, when I wanted to invite regular people on the show, they scoffed at me, like, those regular people. But I have learned where the bodies are buried, figuratively. I have learned who's corrupt from people that live in communities. So when I hear that, there was a story like Russia hacked the Vermont electrical grid and Russia hacked voting systems, but nothing happened. You have a story this week. I just did a video on it. The Pentagon saying that Russian trolls increased 2,000% after the Syria airstrikes. When they were asked, how do you measure that? They said, basically, we'll tell you later. So I know they're lying because it's always, well, that's classified. It's always, that's classified. We can't tell you. That's not, that's for national security reasons. We can't tell you. Well, if you're going to go to war, if you're going to bomb other countries, you got to provide some proof. Because I recall in Iraq, we actually went there and the talking point, yeah, we're still technically looking for those WMDs. No. War and military is supposed to be when you are under threat of imminent attack, not because we don't like a dictator around the world. In some cases, I'm okay with intervention for humanitarian aid, but there's a difference between temporary aid and bombing nuclear armed countries. So to me, my journalistic philosophy has come from, I have been out a lot of these places I go, Jamarl, the misery and the injustice are with Democratic mayors or Democratic governors. So that's why I know they're lying, because basically I'm seeing manifested the controlled demolition of what's left of the middle class, water contamination around the country. I mean, when I was in St. Louis, it's not just the black man getting shot. They were telling me it's still basically like Jim Crow segregation there. Black people can't drive in certain areas. Black people don't get hired in downtown at businesses. So I know the government's lying because I've had the fortune of going out there and talking to people and seeing things. Now, does the government sometimes do good things? Yes. Do I think under certain leaders they would lie less, like a Bernie? Yeah, I do. But the government's lying because you don't have that income inequality chart where the money's funneling to the top for the last 40 years if they're telling you the truth. You don't spend $6 trillion over the last 2 decades if you're getting told the truth.
Fair enough. Yeah, agreed. You said visceral hatred. I often tend to believe that when people say stuff, they mean it, even though they make back stuff from it. What do you mean by visceral hatred? And I know you said, no, it's not really visceral hatred, but clearly there's something there that points to the direction of, these people get on my nerves. They anger me. What is it? What is the visceral hatred with current media, and why?
You
Is it the
know,
truth thing? Is it because you feel like they're putting a con on the American public?
my visceral hatred is very simple. When you sit on a doorstep with with a mother in Flint who all her kids are sick, and she's sick and her husband's sick, and the government's not doing anything for you, and I turn on the TV at the hotel and they're covering something Trump tweeted.
Yeah.
That's what it comes from. When I'm in East Chicago, Indiana, and there's a lead crisis there, and I'm sitting with a single black mother who literally had a hysterectomy at 29 after moving into this complex, and is disabled now at 40. Her kids are all sick, and the government's not doing. In a lot of cases, it's not only that the government's not doing anything; they're saying there's no problem. When I'm in Standing Rock, and literally American citizens next to me, Native Americans, environmental activists, are getting shot in the face. Rubber bullets, they could hurt.
Yeah.
They could do damage. When you see a young woman, she nearly had her arm amputated due to a grenade from the police.
Grenade. Yeah.
And the media is not covering it. I do blame the politicians, but at the end of the day, the media's job is to hold the politicians accountable. So if the media is not, if the media is covering for the politicians, that's where my hatred comes from. Because there's kind of been this caricature of me over months that I'm some narcissist who only cares about myself, but I truly care about the people I'm covering in those communities. If I didn't, I wouldn't be going there. So that's kind of where, I don't know if it's hatred or just like disgust, but I really, I think that these journalists, it's not just Fox News, these journalists at CNN, MSNBC, maybe when they first got into it, they had altruistic motives, but they're out of touch, and they are contributing, in my view, to people dying and people suffering. And that's where that comes from.
Agreed. Hands down. Like I was stuck watching CNN yesterday, and I wasn't stuck. Stuck is too strong. It was on the television. I could have changed the television. I just was too lazy to get up and change it. But I was somewhat enthralled by what I was saying. It's so disconnected. Like it's so out of touch with the life of the typical person and the things that a typical person goes through. Is so disconnected. I think the last poll on CNN, when they were talking about media was abysmal. Like, the American public regarded these guys as horrible. Yeah, it's fascinating to see the failure of media like this, in the way they cover for political parties and what takes place in America. Corporate con job. What is corporate con job, and what is going on with corporate con job? When is it released?
Yeah, so I started when I was at Young Turks, working on my book. I probably should have written it in real time while I was out covering these stories, but I was tired after these long days. Basically, it's kind of a mix of my experience covering the campaign, covering Standing Rock, Flint, East Chicago. I did a Disappearing Middle Class tour. A lot of it's kind of the behind the scenes of what people wouldn't know happened. First chapter was, the Bernie blackout, kind of going into detail how the media took down Bernie's campaign.
Yeah.
Second chapter was actually, to me, the real explanation of what created Trump, which was actually not Russia, but Bill Clinton and deregulation of the media. That's what created Trump more than anything else. Chapter 3 was on me covering the Hillary Clinton campaign. And chapter 4, I think, is really important because nobody's really been talking anymore. 2016 had unprecedented election fraud. Lee Camp and some others still cover those kind of issues. So the book is kind of, I'd say half deep dive memoir and half explaining how the corporate media works, because I've been in both. I've worked in corporate media and outside. I did something different. I wanted to just get it out, so I've been releasing it chapter by chapter online. And I believe next week, I believe we're going to be releasing the Standing Rock chapter, which I'm excited about. And yeah, I just have a Patreon for it. People could go there. You could $1, $2 a chapter, whatever. There's different levels. And yeah, that's my reporting. Patreon is patreon.com/Jordan Sheridan Reports. The book one is patreon.com/Jordan Sheridan.
I have two more questions. So you worked at MSNBC. Cenk and Ed Schultz have essentially said the same thing. That that MSNBC tried to force their stories, meaning we don't like you covering certain stories and putting pressure on them to either shut up or toe a particular line. Do you think that they are so affiliated with the Democratic Party that the connections between those two things are direct, or do you think this is purely an indirect process?
The vice president of Comcast held a fundraiser for Hillary Clinton in 2015.
There you go. There you go. That's what I mean.
Chris Matthews' wife ran for Congress and is getting money from all of the Clinton circle.
It would be insane. They believe. Oh God, man, they believe we're idiots.
And by the way, Jamarl, I got a lot of shit today on Twitter or yesterday because there's all this hubbubaloo about like Sean Hannity. Is he Michael Cohen's client? Yeah. Is he not? So I just pointed out, hey, if Sean Hannity gets fired, great. I love that. I don't like Sean Hannity. That's fine. But when Chuck Todd is tweeting about the conflict of interest, well, WikiLeaks revealed Chuck Todd literally held a dinner in the honor of Hillary Clinton's communications chairwoman during the campaign. He and his wife held a dinner in her honor. Chuck Todd never disclosed that on air when he covered the Clinton campaign, when he covered the Bernie campaign. He's had her on, this communications chairwoman. So how dare I pointed out, Chuck, you're kind of a hypocrite here. And people were saying you're the king of the false equivalency. I'm like, no, two things could be true. Hannity is a premier propagandist. I think he is very dangerous in some respects. God bless if he gets fired. But I don't want to hear from Chuck Todd or any of these people because they're all conflicted.
Yeah.
I just learned Anderson Cooper interned at the CIA. I had no idea.
No shit. Are you serious?
Yeah. Anderson Cooper interned at the CIA. I mean, you see in Washington Post columns that they have a $600 million contract with Amazon. And now the Pentagon is about to give Amazon a $10 billion contract. So I think that, you know what, if MSNBC would just come out and say, listen, we are the network for the Democratic Party and the establishment, great. That's truth in advertising. If CNN would come out and say, like, we're the anti-Trump resistance, great. But I think, unfortunately, because to really get electoral change, you're going to have to start to convince a lot of the older voters. And I want to be clear, there's a lot of older progressives. So it's not a criticism of older voters, but when I was on the road, I mean, Hillary Clinton's voters were generally 45 and up.
Yeah.
And the problem is, though MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, their audience is generally that older, more establishment generation. So the only way you convince those people is if they learn the truth. My parents, God bless them, they are very, very ill. They watch Fox News. They love Fox News. I don't mean ill literally. I mean, they watch Fox News. My dad's like card-carrying Trumper. When I showed them the videos from Standing Rock, when I showed them the videos from Flint, they care. Yeah. They just don't know. So I think that's the problem. And MSNBC is 120% an arm of the Democratic Party, and especially the Clinton wing of the Democratic Party. And when you have Comcast, who's literally responsible for ending net neutrality, and MSNBC, they don't cover it. When you have Time Warner, which owns CNN, is Hillary Clinton's 7th largest donor in her career. That was never, ever disclosed.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. It's not mind-blowing because it's one of those things where it's clear. Joy Ann Reid is on. If you're on Joy Ann Reid's Twitter feed, it's very clear the side that Joy Ann Reid is on. There's no such thing as truth in advertising. And this, for all intents and purposes, that woman is in the tank. And so it's like when you hear them saying, yes, I work there and they're putting pressure on me, it becomes just like, it sounds like MSNBC has a very clear dog in the hunt. It's only questions, is it direct or is it indirect? Is it the host or, yeah, we kind of trend towards the Democrat, or is it, no. This is the line you're going to toe if you're going to work here. I was curious about which one. That's amazing.
And I'll tell you what personally has crushed me. When I started
crushed you. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, bothered me. When I started getting into politics a lot, it was in the mid 2000s, and I honestly wouldn't go out drinking in college so I could watch Keith Olbermann.
Yeah,
Like,
me too, me too, me
Keith,
too.
Keith Olbermann,
I
I
know what you're
thought
going to say. Crushed is the right word. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Keith Olbermann to me was the opposition and truth against an illegal war and that terrible, terrible administration. And to see him, I mean, he's not at MSNBC anymore, but to see him recently on The View, like apologize
It
to George
hurt.
W. Bush,
It
I
hurt.
almost threw up.
It
And
hurt.
I think that's what's going on here. You have this selective amnesia. And at the end of the day, Jamarl, like when you work as a journalist and you make a certain amount of money, it's just human nature. You grow a little detached from reality.
Yeah.
You start forgetting who your real enemies are. You start forgetting who's really responsible for the misery in the country because you don't think the country is miserable because you personally have it good. That's what happens at CNN.
Or Keith Olbermann is just a Democrat, and that Bush was in office, and so he could be opposition because Bush was in office and Bush was fighting a war. I think it's Keith Olbermann is just a Democrat. I think when the times changed, Keith Olbermann ended up on the other side of this with Trump in office, and now all of a sudden he's upset at Donald Trump. So he forgives the things that Obama has done, and he just says, "Oh my God, George Bush wasn't as bad as I thought he was," because he hates Donald Trump. Like I honestly think he's just opposition to whatever Republican Party is, or I'm saying this poorly. He's just opposition. If Keith Olbermann needs to take, at least I hope that's what it is. I loved Keith Olbermann, and it hurt into my heart when I saw him on The View apologizing for Bush.
Yeah,
it hurt. Like it when you said it's. I laughed when you first said it. It pained me, but I realized it was like, yeah, you're right. It hurt. Keith Olbermann was part of my political awakening. I love the guy. Like if anybody looks at those old tapes of Keith Olbermann going after George Bush, just out of the blue, he was the first one to do it. Like these long diatribes, they were going for like eight minutes with him just bashing George Bush. And you're like, yes, this guy's right. Yes, this guy's right. And then Obama comes in office, picks up Bush's wars, and Keith Olbermann shuts the fuck up.
Mm-hmm.
Shuts
and
up.
Also, you had mentioned Ed Schultz.
Yeah.
So when Keith Olbermann left, they had originally put Lawrence O'Donnell in to replace Keith O'Donnell. Keith Olbermann. Lawrence O'Donnell, I don't enjoy watching him, but the ratings weren't great. They switched Ed Schultz to 8 o'clock. Ed Schultz has terrific ratings, but he's talking about unions too much. He's
and
talking.
TPP, yeah.
So they moved it. They took their highest rated guy out of 8 o'clock. They moved him to 5 o'clock. And then after he ranted against the TPP and was pro Bernie, gone. So it's very clear. And honestly, that's part of what I want to do with my hopefully new network that I launch soon. I'm going to cover these stories, but we're also going to expose the corporate media because at the end of the day, more people need to know the truth. They're not experiencing journalism. They're experiencing public relations for corporate America and the government. That's what MSNBC is. That's what the New York Times is. I give credit to some of these journalists because whether I like their work or not, they do, go to dangerous places. And I've seen it, But at the end of the day, if you're just regurgitating and being a stenographer for what the CIA tells you or the president tells you or your sources in administrations tell you, you're not a journalist. You're a puppet and you're part of the problem. So I think there needs to be a lot more journalism. And I think it's super important, whether it's me, Jimmy, you, Kyle Kalinske, if people, I'm not going to attack TYT. If people still want to watch them, support independent media because this is part of the progressive movement. This is what's awakening so many people that are going to these marches, that are going to protest, that are running for office. Voices like Jimmy Dore, voices like you, voices like Kyle. I've seen it on the road. I mean, I had a lot of people come up to me. I'll never forget this at Standing Rock, telling me I got in my car after I saw one of your videos. And if you could have that kind of impact in your life or your career, that's amazing. I mean, I don't need a lot of money, but if I could do that, if anything, any video or report I do could inspire someone to act, then that's what I want to do. And I think we need a lot more of that.